It's not the silence that hurts, it's what you think the silence means. You sit alone, not because you want to, but because no one stayed. Not because you failed, but because it feels like you did. And no one tells you what to do with that kind of emptiness. You scroll past photos of couples, families, lives that look so full, while your own feels like it's stuck in pause. You wonder, did I mess up? Am I just not lovable enough? But what if I told you? This loneliness you hate so much isn't a punishment, but a passageway. What if living alone isn't the end of your story, but the moment your real soul begins to awaken? Carl Jung spent his life studying the human psyche, and he spoke often of the shadow, those parts of ourselves we hide, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. But what he rarely gets credit for is what he revealed about solitude, about the sacred act of being alone with yourself. He believed that the self, your truest, most whole identity, can't be found while you're still performing, still proving, still trying to be someone else for someone who already left, still wearing the mask that promises you'll be lovable if you just get it right this time. We think love will fix us, that healing must come in a relationship, in someone choosing us, in external validation that we matter. But the soul doesn't awaken in noise. It awakens in silence, in stillness. In those lonely nights, you try so hard to numb with Netflix, wine, endless scrolling, or whatever helps you avoid the truth that's waiting in the quiet. Not because you're weak, but because you were never taught that emptiness can be holy, that loneliness can be sacred, that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. Jung understood something revolutionary, that the deepest transformation happens not when we're being watched, applauded, or chosen, but when we're finally brave enough to watch ourselves, without filters, without an audience, without the desperate need to be anything other than what we authentically are. This isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting human connection. This is about discovering that the person you've been looking for in everyone else, the one who truly sees you, understands you, accepts you completely, has been waiting inside you all along. And maybe, just maybe, that person has been trying to get your attention through the very loneliness you've been trying to escape. You learned early that being alone meant something was wrong, that a quiet child is a sad child, that a single adult is someone who's failed to be loved, that silence needed to be filled, that solitude was something to be fixed, that your worth was measured by how many people wanted to be around you. So you over-adapted. You became the entertainer, the helper, the listener, the one who always had plans. You filled the silence with people, plans, performance. You wore the mask of "I'm fine" even when your chest was caving in, even when you felt like you were drowning in plain sight. You learned to be what others needed. You learned to shrink your intensity so others wouldn't feel overwhelmed. You learned to laugh when you wanted to cry, to say yes when your body was screaming no, to be available when you needed rest, to be understanding when you needed to be heard. But here's what no one told you. The soul doesn't rise when you're being watched. It rises when you're no longer performing, when no one's clapping, when no one's choosing you, when the spotlight goes out, and you finally meet the person behind the mask. Let me tell you about Sarah. 32 years old, successful marketing director, the friend everyone called when they needed advice, support, or someone to listen to their problems. She was known for her warmth, her wisdom, her ability to make everyone feel seen and heard. She spent her weekends hosting dinner parties, her weekdays networking and building connections, her nights texting back and forth with people who somehow never really asked how she was doing. Sarah's calendar was always full, but something felt empty. She had countless acquaintances, but few real friends. She was everyone's go-to person, but she had no one to go to. She was surrounded by people who loved what she did for them, but she wondered if anyone would love who she was when she wasn't doing anything at all. Then the pandemic hit. The dinner parties stopped. The networking events vanished. The constant buzz of social validation went silent. And for the first time in years, Sarah was alone with herself. Really alone. No distractions, no roles to play, no one to take care of except herself. At first, it felt like drowning. The anxiety was overwhelming. Without her role as the together one, who was she? Without constant plans and people and purpose, what was left? The silence felt oppressive, like a judgment. It seemed to echo with every rejection she'd ever experienced, every time someone had left, every moment she'd felt invisible despite being surrounded by others. But slowly, something shifted. In the quiet, mornings with her coffee, she started hearing a voice she hadn't heard in years. Her own voice. Not the one that told people what they wanted to hear, but the one that had been whispering her real dreams, her real fears, her real truth for decades. She realized she had no idea what she actually enjoyed doing when she wasn't doing it for someone else's approval. She didn't know what movies she liked when she wasn't choosing ones that would spark conversation. She didn't know what she thought about politics, art, life, love, when she wasn't tailoring her opinions to fit the room. Yes, it was terrifying, because all her suppressed grief, her forgotten rejections, her buried disappointments came rushing back. Every time she'd silenced herself to keep the peace. Every time she'd said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. Every dream she'd abandoned because it seemed too selfish, too risky, too much. But this wasn't regression. This was emergence. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you really are, of integrating all the scattered pieces of yourself into something whole and authentic. Not who the world trained you to be, but who you already are, underneath the conditioning, underneath the fear, underneath the shame. Jung believed that we all develop what he called a persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It's not fake. It serves a real purpose. It helps us belong, survive, navigate social situations. But problems arise when we become so identified with the persona that we forget there's a real person underneath it. The mask you've been wearing isn't wrong. It served a purpose. It kept you safe, helped you belong, protected you from rejection and abandonment. But now it's become a prison, and the key to that prison, it's been in your pocket all along. You just forgot you were holding it. Solitude is that key. Jung said that individuation requires us to face what he called the transcendent function, the bridge between our conscious ego and our unconscious wisdom. This bridge only appears when we stop running from ourselves, when we stop filling every quiet moment with noise, when we stop mistaking being alone for being abandoned. This is where the real work begins. Not the work of becoming someone new, but the work of remembering who you've always been, beneath all the trying, all the performing, all the desperate attempts to be chosen. Pause here and take a breath. Is this what you've been carrying all along? This fear that being alone means you're unworthy of love, this belief that your value comes from what you do for others, rather than who you are when no one's watching. You sit in your room, no texts, no plans, no one asking anything of you, and a voice inside you whispers, "You're not enough." But that's not your truth. That's the voice of every person who couldn't handle your depth, your sensitivity, your intensity. That's the voice of abandonment speaking. You are not alone because you're unworthy. You are not alone because you're broken or difficult or too much. You are alone because the version of you that once begged for crumbs, that bent over backward for scraps of attention, that silenced herself to make others comfortable, that version is finally dying. And when that part dies, it gets loud, it panics, it throws a tantrum. It wants to pull you back to old stories, old patterns, old ways of being small so others can feel big. It screams that you need someone, anyone, to validate your existence. But stay still, stay present, breathe through the discomfort. Because just beyond that panic, your soul starts to move. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow. But not just the dark, rejected parts of yourself. The shadow also contains what he called your golden shadow, your lost power, your suppressed brilliance, all the magnificent parts of you that were deemed too much by people who were living too little. Your creativity that someone called impractical, your emotional depth that someone called overwhelming, your intuition that someone called irrational, your standards that someone called unrealistic, your dreams that someone called naive. You begin to hear a new voice, one that doesn't scream for attention, doesn't beg for validation, but simply says with quiet certainty, "I'm still here. I've been waiting for you to remember me." The self, the original you, the one that was never too loud, too emotional, too weird, too sensitive. She didn't leave when they rejected her. She didn't disappear when they abandoned her. She just went underground, waiting for the day you'd be brave enough to stop performing and start being. This is the moment Jung described as the dark night of the soul. But it's not punishment, it's preparation. You're not falling apart. You're being reorganized at a cellular level. Every old story about your unworthiness is being dissolved so something truer can emerge. Let me share Marcus's story, a 30-year-old high school teacher who spent his 20s being the reliable one, always available, always accommodating, always saying yes when his body was screaming no. He was the friend people called when they needed a favor, the boyfriend who never complained when plans got cancelled, the son who came home for every family obligation even when it drained him. His last relationship ended on a Tuesday morning. She said he was too available, too predictable. The words cut deep because they confirmed his worst fear. That even his kindness wasn't enough to make someone stay. He spent months replaying every conversation, analyzing every interaction, wondering what he could have done differently. He went through what he calls his dark period. Months of isolation, not by choice but by circumstance. Friends were busy with their own lives. Dating felt impossible when he couldn't even figure out who he was without someone to please. He spent evenings in his small apartment, feeling like a failure at 30, like everyone else had figured out this thing called life, while he was still stuck in some adolescent pattern of seeking approval. Then one night, sitting alone with his thoughts for what felt like the 1,000th time, he had a realization that changed everything. He wasn't too much or too little. He was simply not himself. He had been so busy being what he thought others wanted that he had no idea who he actually was beneath all the accommodating. That night, he started what he called his return journey. Not back to who he was before, because he realized he'd never actually been himself to begin with, but forward to who he'd always been underneath the performance, underneath the fear of disappointing people. He began saying no to plans that drained him, even when it meant disappointing friends. He started writing again, poetry, stories, thoughts he'd been keeping locked away because they seemed too personal, too revealing. He stopped texting back immediately, not to play games, but because he was finally learning to listen to his own rhythm instead of constantly responding to everyone else's. He joined a hiking group, not to meet people, but because he discovered he loved being in nature when no one was watching. He took a pottery class because his hands wanted to create something, not because it would look good on social media. He started therapy, not to fix himself, but to understand himself. The loneliness didn't disappear overnight, but it transformed from a sharp ache of abandonment to a soft space of possibility, from evidence of his unworthiness to a sanctuary where he could finally hear his own voice. 6 months later, he met someone, but this time he didn't change himself to fit her expectations. He didn't hide his love of poetry, or his need for solitude, or his sensitivity. And she didn't ask him to, because he had learned something revolutionary. The right people don't need you to be different than you are. If this part hits something in you, keep going. The next few minutes might feel like a mirror reflecting back a truth you've been afraid to see. You're remembering something your soul has always known. You don't need to be chosen by everyone to be worthy of love. You just need to stop abandoning yourself for the possibility that someone else might stay. The people who truly belong in your life won't ask you to shrink, perform, or pretend. They'll see your fullness and want to walk beside it, not fix it, change it, or tone it down. As you begin to allow the silence instead of fighting it, your body starts to remember what safety feels like. Your nervous system, trained to brace for rejection, criticism, abandonment, starts to relax for the first time in years. You stop over-explaining your choices to people who didn't ask. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to predict every possible response. You stop needing to prove your worth through your productivity, your helpfulness, your availability. And something magical happens. Your intuition returns, not the loud, follow your dreams kind that sounds good in motivational videos, but the gentle, persistent nudges that have been trying to guide you all along. Rest now. Don't answer that text right away. Trust this uncomfortable feeling about that person. Say no to this invitation. Try that thing you've been curious about. Carl Jung believed intuition was one of the 4 primary functions of the psyche, along with thinking, feeling, and sensation. He saw it as a way of knowing that bypasses logical analysis, a direct perception of possibilities, meanings, and hidden potentials. And it only activates when the persona, the mask we wear for the world, dissolves enough to let your authentic self breathe. You start noticing things you'd trained yourself to ignore. The way certain people leave you, feeling drained, even when the conversation was pleasant. The way your body contracts around certain environments, certain choices, certain compromises you've been making to keep the peace. You realize that what you thought was being difficult was actually your inner wisdom trying to protect something sacred in you. Your boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were guidelines to help the right people in. This isn't becoming antisocial or bitter or closed off. This is becoming authentic. This is learning to trust the part of you that knows what serves your highest good. Even when it doesn't make logical sense, you begin to understand that your sensitivity was never a weakness. It was a superpower that got misunderstood by people who were afraid of feeling too much. Your intensity was never too much. It was exactly right for the people who could match it. In solitude, you practice a revolutionary act. You stop seeking love to fix you, complete you, or validate your existence. And instead, you start becoming someone who knows how to hold love without losing yourself in the process. This is where Jung's concept of active imagination becomes a powerful tool for self-discovery. In the quiet spaces, you begin having conversations with different parts of yourself. The part that's afraid and needs reassurance. The part that's angry and needs to be heard. The part that's grieving and needs to be witnessed. The part that's hopeful and ready to try again. You realize that you're not one simple thing. You're complex, multifaceted, sometimes contradictory. And that's not confusion. That's wholeness. That's what it means to be human. Try this tonight when you're alone. Sit quietly and ask yourself, what have I been afraid to feel? And then just listen. Don't judge what comes up. Don't try to fix it or analyze it or make it prettier. Just witness it with the same compassion you'd offer a good friend. This practice of emotional witnessing is at the heart of Jung's therapeutic approach. He believed that consciousness itself is healing, that simply seeing something clearly begins to transform it. When you stop running from your emotions and start witnessing them, they lose their power to control you. You might discover anger you've been carrying for years. Not the explosive kind, but the quiet resentment that builds when you consistently abandon your own needs for others. You might find grief that's been waiting to be felt. For the childhood you never had, for the relationships that couldn't honor your depth, for the parts of yourself you sacrifice trying to be acceptable. And surprisingly, you might also discover joy that's been buried under layers of performance anxiety. The simple pleasure of existing without needing to prove anything to anyone. The relief of finally putting down the exhausting burden of trying to be perfect. Your emotions aren't problems to be solved. They're messengers bringing information about what you need, what you value, what you're being called toward or away from. The tears that come in solitude aren't weakness, they're release. The anger that surfaces isn't evidence you're broken. It's evidence you're finally ready to protect what matters. You stop performing your healing for others and start living it for yourself. You stop updating everyone on your progress and start focusing on the actual journey. You stop seeking validation for your growth and start trusting your own experience of it. Here's what changed for Sarah during her months of solitude. She discovered she actually loved gardening, something she'd never had time for when she was constantly social. She realized she preferred deep conversations with one person over small talk with many. She found that she was naturally creative in ways she'd forgotten. Writing in journals, arranging flowers, cooking elaborate meals just for herself. She also uncovered some painful truths. She realized that many of her friendships were one-sided, built on her giving and others taking. She saw how she'd been using busyness to avoid dealing with her childhood trauma. She recognized that her fear of being alone stemmed from feeling invisible in her family growing up. But instead of drowning in these realizations, she felt strangely liberated by them. Because for the first time, she was seeing clearly. And clarity, even when it's painful, is always better than confusion. She started setting boundaries with friends who only called when they needed something. She reduced her social calendar to include only activities that genuinely energized her. She began therapy to address the old wounds that were still driving her need for external validation. And something beautiful happened. The right people started showing up in her life. People who appreciated her depth, who reciprocated her care, who saw her as more than just a resource. Because when you stop being available to everyone, you become available to the people who matter. Jung taught that what we resist persists, but what we feel heals. The emotions you've been avoiding through constant social stimulation don't disappear when you're with others. They just get buried deeper. But in solitude, they finally have space to move through you and transform. This is the paradox of healing. You have to feel it to heal it. You have to be alone with your pain before you can be whole with another person. You have to become comfortable with your own company before anyone else's company can truly satisfy you. There's a beautiful concept in Jungian psychology called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of rushing to resolve uncomfortable feelings or escape into distraction, you learn to sit with contradiction, with uncertainty, with the messy complexity of being human. This capacity to hold space for your own emotional reality is perhaps the greatest gift solitude offers. In our culture of quick fixes and instant gratification, this patient witnessing of your inner landscape is revolutionary. You're not trying to optimize yourself or hack your way to happiness. You're simply learning to be present with whatever arises, knowing that presence itself is transformative. You were never failing. You were unraveling. And there's a profound difference between the two. Failing implies you were supposed to be something different, that you missed some mark, that you're broken and need fixing. Unraveling means you're shedding what was never really you to begin with. The conditioning, the people-pleasing, the desperate attempts to earn love through performance, and the loneliness you hated. It wasn't empty space that needed to be filled. It was sacred space. Your soul needed to remember who you are when no one else's opinion matters. You now understand, solitude isn't a sentence you're serving for being unlovable. It's sanctuary you've been gifted to find your way back to yourself. You no longer chase belonging because you carry it within you. You no longer silence your truth because now that voice has become your most trusted compass. You no longer need someone else to complete you because you've remembered that you were never incomplete to begin with. Jung spoke of individuation as the journey toward psychological wholeness, becoming who you were always meant to be rather than who you were conditioned to be. But what he really meant was this: having the courage to be disliked for being yourself rather than loved for being someone else. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or uncaring. It means caring for yourself with the same devotion you've shown others. It means treating your own needs as valid, your own feelings as important, your own dreams as worthy of pursuit. You've learned that real love, the kind worth waiting for, doesn't ask you to shrink your intensity, dim your light, or silence your truth. Real love recognizes your fullness and wants to walk beside it, celebrate it, help it flourish. So if love comes again, and it might, it won't find a desperate person trying to fill a hole with another person's presence. It'll find someone whole, someone grounded, someone who chose themselves first and can therefore choose another person freely, not from need, but from abundance. The relationship you've been seeking, you've been building it with yourself, and that's the only foundation strong enough to hold anything real, anything lasting, anything that honors both people involved. Here's what Marcus learned. The loneliness he'd been running from wasn't actually loneliness. It was homesickness for himself. He'd been so busy being who others needed him to be that he'd become a stranger to his own soul. The months of solitude weren't punishment for being unlovable. They were an invitation to remember what he loved about being alive. He learned that his sensitivity wasn't a character flaw to overcome, but a gift to embrace. His need for quiet wasn't antisocial behavior, but self-care. His depth wasn't too much for the right person. It was exactly what someone else who lived deeply had been looking for. The woman he eventually met didn't fall in love with a performance or a persona. She fell in love with someone who knew himself, who had done his inner work, who could be present with her because he'd learned to be present with himself. And Sarah, she discovered that the dinner parties she'd been hosting weren't actually about connection. They were about control. When she could orchestrate the social situation, she felt safe. But real connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires trust. And trust requires knowing who you are when no one's watching. Her new friendships are fewer but deeper. Her romantic relationships are more authentic because she's no longer trying to be who she thinks someone wants her to be. She's simply being herself and letting that be enough. This is your invitation. Stop seeing solitude as punishment and start experiencing it as preparation. Not for someone else to complete you, but for you to remember that you were never incomplete to begin with. The silence doesn't mean you're forgotten. It means you're finally ready to be found. By yourself first, then by life, then by love that doesn't ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but maybe it's also the most liberating thing. Because when you stop running from who you are, you stop attracting people who need you to be someone else. You are not alone because no one wants you. You are alone because you're finally brave enough to want yourself, to choose yourself, to believe that your company is not only enough, but necessary for your own healing. And that changes everything. When you love your own solitude, it stops being loneliness and becomes freedom. When you enjoy your own company, other people's presence becomes a choice, not a need. When you feel whole on your own, relationships become about sharing that wholeness, not trying to find it in someone else. The paradox is beautiful. When you stop needing people, you become the kind of person people want to be around. When you stop chasing love, you become love. When you stop running from yourself, you become exactly who you were always meant to be. This is the gift of conscious solitude. This is your soul awakening. This is coming home to yourself. Take a moment to honor this journey you've taken, even if it's just been these 30 minutes with me. If this message reached something in you that's been waiting to be heard, if you felt seen in your solitude rather than judged for it, leave a comment below with the words, "My presence is enough," not just as a signal that you made it to the end, but as a promise you're making to yourself. A commitment to stop abandoning yourself in pursuit of others' approval. A declaration that your company is valuable, your solitude is sacred, and your journey toward wholeness matters. And if this exploration into Jung's wisdom around the shadow and solitude helped you see your aloneness differently, consider clicking the like button. Your support helps this message reach others who might need to hear what you just heard. That sometimes being alone is not the end of the story, but the beginning of the most important chapter. The chapter where you stop being a character in someone else's story and start being the author of your own. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for staying with yourself through the difficult parts. Thank you for being brave enough to consider that your solitude might be sacred. I'll see you in the next journey into the depths of what it means to be authentically, unapologetically human. The journey inward is the only journey that matters, and you've been on it all along.